Jae-min Kim's jaw tightened as he replayed the footage for the fifth time. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. His private surveillance hub felt like a tomb, suffocating, airless. The electric blue glow from a dozen monitors carved harsh shadows across his rigid face, illuminating the jagged black tattoo that crawled up the left side of his neck like a serpent. There she was again, Tasha Williams, the black American cleaner he'd hired 3 months ago against everyone's advice, moving through his private quarters like a ghost. In the grainy night vision feed, her movements looked guilty, furtive. She glanced over her shoulder twice before approaching his mahogany desk, her tan cleaning apron dirty from the day's work. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the velvet watchbox, his father's watchbox, and lifted the lid. The camera angle shifted for exactly 4 seconds. When it returned, the box sat open, empty. Jae-min had built his soul syndicate on instinct, on reading betrayal in people's eyes before they even knew they'd break. He'd suspected something was off the moment Mr. Cho, his head of security, came to him 2 weeks ago with concerns. "Sajangnim," Mr. Cho had said, his voice professionally neutral. "The American. She's been acting strange, leaving the estate at odd hours. We followed her to Gangnam twice last week." It made sense. Tasha was an outsider, isolated, barely speaking Korean beyond basic phrases like "Joseonghamnida" and "Gamsahamnida," working brutal double shifts in a household where the other staff treated her like contaminated air. She needed money. Everyone in Seoul needed money. But watching her now, caught red-handed on his $1,000,001 surveillance system, still made something dark twist in Jae-min's chest. He'd wanted to be wrong. On screen, Tasha slipped something into her apron pocket and disappeared down the corridor, her movements quick but exhausted. Jae-min leaned forward, his expensive suit crisp despite the late hour. His phone sat on the desk beside him, its weight a familiar promise. This was it, the proof he needed. One phone call and Tasha Williams would be handled. Not killed, he wasn't a monster, but removed, permanently. Sent back to whatever American city she'd fled from, with enough fear in her bones to never speak of what she'd seen in his world. His finger hovered over his phone, but something made him hesitate. He thought of his son, Min Jun, 7 years old and dying in a hospital bed across the city. The boy needed emergency surgery, a complicated procedure that the doctors kept delaying. "Hwanja ui sangtae ga bulan jong hamnida," they'd say. The patient's condition is unstable. More waiting, more tests, more time his son didn't have. Jae-min's hands that had built an empire through violence and calculation, clenched into fists. He delegated everything to his staff, the estate, the business, even his dying son's medical care, because he was too important, too busy managing territory and crushing rivals to handle details. He trusted them. Mr. Cho, who'd served his family for 15 years, the household staff who'd never given him reason to doubt, the doctors his money had bought. He'd trusted them completely. His phone buzzed. A motion-triggered alert from the hospital. Camera 3, Min Jun's private room. Jae-min's blood went cold. He'd installed military-grade surveillance in that room 6 days ago, paranoid that the medical delays weren't accidental, that someone was targeting his son. His thumb swiped across the screen, pulling up the live feed. The images loaded. What he saw made his breath stop completely. The hospital room appeared on screen, sterile white walls, machines beeping rhythmically, his son's small body dwarfed by the bed, an oxygen mask covering half his pale face. Standing beside the bed was a nurse in scrubs, professional but impatient. And kneeling before her, trembling but determined, was Tasha Williams. She wasn't selling his watch. She was holding out her own jewelry. A delicate gold chain, old, worn, clearly cherished. A wedding band that caught the fluorescent light. Tasha's hands shook as the nurse examined the pieces with cold calculation, weighing them, judging their worth. "Aolmana Durilkayo?" the nurse asked. "How much will you give?" Tasha's broken Korean came through the audio feed, desperate and raw. "Please, surgery, the boy, Polly, fast." Jae-min watched, paralyzed, as the transaction unfolded. The nurse pocketed the jewelry. Tasha's face crumpled, not with relief, but with the weight of what she'd just sacrificed. She reached out, her exhausted hand gently touching Minjun's forehead through the oxygen mask, a gesture so tender it belonged to a mother, not a stranger. The security room spun. Jae-min's vision tunneled as he scrolled back through the hospital footage. 1 day, 2 days, 5 days back. There. Mr. Cho enters Minjun's room, speaking quietly to the head surgeon. No audio, but Jae-min could read body language. Money changing hands. A nod. An agreement. They were stalling the surgery. His own people. Extracting bribes while his son deteriorated. And Tasha, beautiful, desperate Tasha, whom everyone assumed was a thief, was selling her last possessions. Her mother's gold. Her own wedding ring from a marriage that must have ended in tragedy, to save the son of a man who was hunting her down. The monitors blurred. Jae-min's hands gripped the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. The jagged tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with his rage. He'd been blind, emotionally blind, trusting technology and fear instead of seeing the truth right in front of him. On screen, Tasha stood slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She adjusted Minjun's blanket, whispered something in English that the camera couldn't translate, and turned to leave. She looked utterly broken. Jae-min grabbed his phone. But this time, the call wasn't to remove her. It was to find out exactly who had betrayed him, and why the only person showing true honor in his house was the woman everyone had told him to throw away. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello and see how far this story is reaching. Your support means everything. The pre-dawn silence of Tasha's quarters was broken by a soft knock. She jerked awake, heart hammering, her hand instinctively reaching for the small canister of pepper spray she kept under her pillow. In Seoul, a knock at 4:30 a.m. rarely meant good news, especially not for someone like her. "Nugu Simnika?" she called out, her voice shaky. "Who is it?" "Open the door, Miss Williams." Mr. Cho's voice was cold, professional. "Mr. Kim wants to see you." Tasha's blood turned to ice. She sat frozen on her narrow bed, the thin walls of the servants' quarters suddenly feeling like a cage. This was it. Whatever she'd done, or hadn't done, had finally caught up with her. She opened the door to find Mr. Cho flanked by 2 security guards she didn't recognize. Their faces were blank, unreadable. Mr. Cho's eyes swept over her rumpled clothes, her exhausted face with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Get dressed. You have 5 minutes." "What did I—" "Now." Tasha changed with trembling hands, her mind racing through every interaction she'd had over the past weeks. Has someone seen her at the hospital? Had the nurse reported her attempt to bribe her way into getting Minjun's surgery moved up? Or worse, had they somehow found out about the jewelry she'd sold? The walk through the estate felt like a death march. Other staff members peeked out from their quarters, their faces a mix of curiosity and schadenfreude. The foreign girl was finally getting what was coming to her. About time. In the kitchen, Mrs. Song, the head cook who'd never spoken a kind word to Tasha in 3 months, watched her pass with something almost like pity. That scared Tasha more than anything else. They led her to a part of the mansion she'd never entered before, a wing reserved for Mr. Kim and his private business. The hallway was lined with expensive art that probably cost more than Tasha would make in her entire lifetime. Everything here whispered power, control, danger. Mr. Cho stopped outside a heavy wooden door. Inside, alone. The surveillance room was nothing like Tasha expected. She'd imagined some kind of office, maybe a study. Instead, she walked into what looked like mission control. A dozen monitors showing every corner of the estate, time-stamped feeds, security protocols she couldn't begin to understand. And there, bathed in cold blue light, sat Jae-min Kim. He didn't turn when she entered, just kept staring at the screens, his posture rigid, that jagged black tattoo on his neck seeming to pulse in the flickering glow. "Sajangnam," Tasha began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain. Sit." She sat in the chair across from him, her legs shaking so badly she was grateful to be off her feet. Jae-min still hadn't looked at her. His eyes were fixed on one particular monitor, replaying footage over and over. Footage of her entering his office 2 nights ago. Oh God, they knew. They'd seen everything. "I clean your office every night," Tasha said quickly, desperately. "It's part of my duties. I never touched anything, I swear, My watch is missing." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Tasha's mouth went dry. "Morago? What?" "My father's watch. Limited edition. Irreplaceable." Jae-min finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her want to disappear. "You were the only person in my office that night, between midnight and 3 a.m., the only person with access. No, I didn't. I would never. Mr. Cho has evidence that you were seen at a pawn shop in Gangnam yesterday afternoon." Tasha's heart stopped. The pawn shop. She had been there. But not with his watch. With her mother's necklace, her wedding ring, the last pieces of her old life. She'd sold them to a dealer who asked no questions, got cash, and used every one to try to save Min Jun's life. But how could she explain that without sounding insane? Without revealing that she'd been bribing hospital staff, interfering in affairs that were none of her business, crossing boundaries that could get her not just fired, but disappeared? If this moment grips you, don't turn away. Subscribe and stay with us, because what happens next will shatter everything she thought she knew about survival. "I was at a pawn shop," Tasha admitted, her voice breaking. "But I didn't sell your watch. I sold my own jewelry. My mama's gold necklace. My wedding ring from—" She stopped, unable to finish. Jae-min leaned forward. "Why would you sell your own jewelry?" "I needed money." "For what?" Tasha looked down at her hands. Calloused, worn hands that had scrubbed floors, cleaned toilets, worked themselves raw trying to survive in a country that saw her as less than human. How could she tell him the truth? That she'd been trying to save his son when his own people were letting the boy die. "I can't tell you," she whispered. "Can't or won't." "Does it matter? You've already decided I'm guilty." She met his eyes then, and something in her broke. 3 months of 18-hour shifts, of cold stares and whispered insults, of eating leftovers standing over a sink because she didn't deserve to sit with the other staff. It all came pouring out. You think I stole from you because I'm desperate, because I'm American, because I'm black and foreign and don't belong here. Tears streamed down her face now, hot and angry. Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong, but I didn't steal your damn watch. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jae-min studied her with those dark, calculating eyes. The same eyes that had built an empire on reading people's weaknesses, on knowing when someone was lying. Where is the money now? He asked quietly. From selling your jewelry. Tasha's throat closed. She couldn't answer. Wouldn't. Miss Williams, it's gone. I spent it. That's all you need to know. Jae-min stood abruptly, and Tasha flinched, but he didn't approach her. Instead, he walked to the window overlooking the estate gardens. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful. Deceptive. You're lying, he said. Not about the watch. I believe you didn't steal it. But you're lying about the money. Believe whatever you want. I could have Mr. Cho pull your phone records, your bank statements, track every movement you've made. He turned to face her. But I'm giving you one chance to tell me the truth. Where did the money go? Tasha stood, her legs unsteady but her voice firm. If you're going to fire me, just do it. I'm tired of this game. I'm not firing you. Then what? I'm trying to understand. Jae-min's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of humanity she'd seen from him. You sold your mother's jewelry, your wedding ring, pieces that clearly meant something to you, and you won't tell me why. He stepped closer. That kind of sacrifice isn't random, Miss Williams. So I'll ask you one more time. What were you trying to save? The question hung between them. Tasha could feel the weight of it, the genuine confusion behind it. This man who controlled everything, who monitored every corner of his world, genuinely didn't know that his own son was dying while his staff extorted desperate people for bribes. He didn't know because no one had told him, or maybe they had, and he'd been too busy to listen. Your son, Tasha whispered. I was trying to save Min-jun. The color drained from Jae-min's face. What? He's dying. For real this time. Not just sick, dying. And the doctors, the nurses, they won't do the surgery unless someone pays them poly money. Express fees. Your office hasn't been answering the hospital's calls for authorization, and the staff there, She stopped, realizing she was about to accuse his own people of corruption, of betrayal. But Jae-min's expression had already shifted to something dark and terrible. Show me. What? Show me proof. Now. Tasha pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She'd taken photos, evidence of the conversations she'd overheard, screenshots of text messages between hospital staff that she'd glimpsed over shoulders, blurry pictures of Min-jun's declining condition that she'd documented because no one else seemed to be paying attention. Jae-min scrolled through them, his jaw clenching tighter with each image. When he reached the photo of Min-jun from yesterday, the boy's skin gray, his breathing labored, his small body looking like a skeleton draped in hospital gowns, something in Jae-min's expression shattered. Why didn't anyone tell me it was this bad? His voice was barely audible. Maybe they did. Maybe you weren't listening. The accusation hit its mark. Jae-min's hands trembled as he handed back her phone. The express fees. How much? 50 million won. I only had 30 from selling my jewelry. It wasn't enough. So what were you planning to do? Tasha laughed bitterly. I don't know. Beg, steal, work triple shifts until I die from exhaustion. She wiped her eyes. I just knew I couldn't watch another child die because no one cared enough to fight for them. Before we continue, quick question. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and subscribe for free because the next story might be even crazier than this one. The silence that followed was broken by Jae-min's phone buzzing. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed. It's the hospital. Motion alert from Minjun's room. He pulled up the feed, and Tasha watched his face cycle through confusion, shock, and something that looked like devastation. On the screen, she could see herself from hours earlier, last night, after her shift had ended. She was in Minjun's room, kneeling beside Nurse Kim, the same nurse who'd been demanding bribes. Tasha was holding out the gold chain, her mother's necklace, and her wedding ring. The nurse examined them with cold efficiency, weighed them, and nodded. The audio was muffled, but Tasha's broken Korean came through clearly enough. Jabal, Minjun, surgery, Polly. The nurse pocketed the jewelry. Tasha's face on screen crumpled, not with relief, but with the weight of what she'd just sacrificed. She reached out, her exhausted hand gently touching Minjun's forehead through the oxygen mask, and whispered something in English that the camera couldn't translate. I told him his appa loved him, Tasha said quietly, watching Jae-min watch the footage. That you were fighting for him, that he just needed to hold on a little longer. Jae-min's hands were shaking now. He scrolled back through the hospital footage, days, then weeks of recordings. Tasha saw herself appear over and over in those feeds, visiting Minjun late at night after her shifts, reading to him, bringing him small gifts, a stuffed animal, a comic book, things she'd bought with money she didn't have. She saw the staff entering the room with empty food trays, saw nurses marking charts without checking vitals, saw Dr. Park having hushed conversations with men in suits who didn't look like medical personnel, and she saw Mr. Cho, his head of security, in the hospital hallway, handing an envelope to Dr. Park, a conversation that ended with both men nodding, satisfied. Shabal, Jae-min cursed, his voice raw. They've been stalling the surgery, on purpose. I think they wanted you distracted, Tasha said carefully. Focused on Minjun instead of whatever else you usually focus on. A coup. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They're trying to stage a coup while I'm vulnerable. Tasha didn't respond. She didn't need to. The evidence was right there on the screens. A conspiracy that had used a dying child as leverage, that had assumed no one would notice because no one cared enough to look. No one except the foreign cleaner who wasn't supposed to matter. Jae-min turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Not anger, not suspicion, but something that looked like shame. You saved my son. I tried to. I don't know if 30 million won is enough. It's not about the money. His voice cracked. You sacrificed everything for a child who isn't yours, in a country where you're treated like contaminated air, while my own people were using him as a pawn. He stepped back, running his hands through his hair. And I was going to have you killed for stealing a watch I don't even wear. The confession hung in the air. Tasha felt her legs go weak. What? That's what happens to thieves in my world. They disappear. Jae-min met her eyes. But you're not a thief. You're the only honest person in this entire estate. If this scene hits you, pause with me. Like the video if you felt it. Subscribe to keep following them. Comment what you think Jae-min does next, because this betrayal runs deeper than anyone imagined. Jae-min made 3 phone calls in rapid succession. The first was to his personal bank. The second was to the hospital. The third was to his most trusted enforcer, someone outside the regular security chain, someone Mr. Cho didn't control. "Gajoa," Jae-min ordered. "Bring him to me, quietly." He ended the call and turned to Tasha. "Go pack your things. You're moving to the main house, third-floor guest quarters." "I don't understand." "My son trusts you. That's more than I can say about anyone else in my organization." He pulled out a checkbook, wrote something quickly, and handed it to her. "This covers what you spent, plus interest, and your new salary starts today." Tasha looked at the check. The number made her dizzy. "This is too much." "It's not enough, but it's a start." Jaemin's expression hardened. "Now go. I need to handle some business, and you don't want to be here for it." Tasha left, clutching the check like a lifeline, her mind reeling. Behind her, she heard Jae-min already making more calls, his voice shifting from broken father to cold-blooded syndicate boss in seconds. The purge was about to begin. An hour later, Mr. Cho entered the surveillance room, summoned by one of Jae-min's assistants. He looked calm, composed, and professional as always, but there was a slight tension in his shoulders, the awareness that something had shifted. "Sajangnim," Cho bowed slightly. "You wanted to see me?" "Sit." Cho sat. His eyes flicked to the monitors, doing the mental calculation that all security professionals do, analyzing exits, assessing threats, planning escapes. Jae-min didn't speak immediately. He just pulled up footage on the main screen. Cho is stealing the watch, frame by frame, clear as daylight. Cho's expression didn't change. "You weren't supposed to find that angle. Explain." "It was necessary. You've become weak, Sajangnim." Cho's voice remained steady, almost clinical. "Hiring foreigners, showing mercy to outsiders, neglecting business while you play father to a sick child. The board agreed. You needed to be reminded of priorities. So you framed Tasha. She was convenient, disposable. No one would question her guilt." Cho leaned forward slightly, his tone almost sympathetic. "And it worked, didn't it? You were ready to handle her, ready to be the leader this organization needs." "And my son?" Jaemin's voice was deadly quiet. "Was delaying his surgery also necessary?" For the first time, Cho's mask slipped, just for a second. "That was about leverage, about ensuring you understood that the syndicate comes first, not sentiment, not personal attachments." Jae-min stood slowly. "My father built this organization to protect his family, not to sacrifice them. Your father would have made the same choice I did. He understood power requires sacrifice." "No." Jae-min walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a handgun. Cho's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't move. "My father understood that power without purpose is just violence, and violence without honor is just cruelty. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you." Jae-min set the gun on the desk between them. Not a threat, but a symbol. "I gave you 15 years of loyalty, authority, respect, and you repaid me by turning my son into a bargaining chip. It was for the syndicate. It was for yourself." Jaemin's voice cut through the excuse like a blade. "You wanted to prove you controlled me, that you were the real power behind this organization. And when I started making decisions you didn't like, you decided to teach me a lesson by letting my child suffer." Cho's jaw clenched. "What are you going to do, kill me? That would make you exactly what I said you were, weak, emotional, unfit to lead." "I'm not going to kill you. That would be too easy." Jae-min pressed a button on his desk. The door opened. 3 enforcers entered. Not Cho's people, but men loyal directly to Jae-min. "Strip his access. freeze his accounts, seize his assets, and make sure everyone in the organization knows exactly why. As the enforcers moved toward him, Cho finally showed fear. "You can't do this. The board members who supported you are being arrested as we speak. Conspiracy, embezzlement, attempted murder of a minor." Jae-min's smile was cold. "Turns out when you try to stage a coup, you should make sure your communications are actually encrypted." Cho was dragged from the room, still protesting, still insisting he'd done the right thing. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the surveillance hub. Jae-min sat alone in the blue glow of the monitors, staring at the footage of Tasha sacrificing her last connection to her old life. A stranger who'd shown more loyalty to his son than his own inner circle. He'd built an empire on fear and control, on surveillance and suspicion. And it had taken a woman with nothing to lose to show him what true loyalty looked like. It looked like a sacrifice without expectation of reward. Do not walk away now. This is where everything changes. If you're still here, you're part of this story. And what comes next will redefine everything Jae-min thought he knew about power. The hospital room was quieter than Tasha had ever heard it. The usual chaos of monitors beeping, nurses bustling, doctors making rounds, all of it had been replaced by an eerie stillness. When she arrived at 6 a.m., escorted by one of Jae-min's drivers, she found out why. The entire floor had been cleared. Private security now guarded every entrance. The corrupt staff, Nurse Kim, Dr. Park, 3 other nurses who'd participated in the extortion scheme, had been removed overnight. In their place were hand-selected medical professionals from Seoul's top hospital, flown in on emergency contracts. And in the center of it all was Min-jun, finally being prepared for the surgery that should have happened weeks ago. "Miss Tasha," the weak voice came from the bed. Min-jun was awake, his eyes brighter than she'd seen them in days. He reached out a skeletal hand toward her. Tasha rushed to his side, taking his hand gently. "Annyeong, sweet boy. How are you feeling?" "Appa came. He said you saved me." Min-jun's eyes filled with tears. "Is that true?" Tasha looked up to find Jae-min standing in the corner of the room. She hadn't noticed him when she entered. He'd been so still, so silent. But now he stepped forward, and she could see the exhaustion etched into his face. He looked like he hadn't slept. Probably hadn't. "Miss Tasha did save you," Jae-min said quietly, moving to stand on the other side of Min-jun's bed. "She did what I should have done weeks ago." Min-jun looked between them, confused. "But you're my appa. You're supposed to protect me." "I know, Adil. I know." Jae-min's voice broke slightly. "And I'm sorry I let you down." The little boy's face crumpled. I thought you didn't want me anymore. Because I got sick. Because Aoyama died, and it was my fault." "Anyo." Jae-min knelt beside the bed, taking his son's other hand. "Your mother's death was not your fault, and I will never, never stop wanting you. I got lost for a while. I forgot what was important." Tasha felt tears sliding down her face. This wasn't the cold Syndicate boss she'd feared. This was a father, broken and desperate, trying to repair damage he didn't even know he'd caused. A doctor entered, Dr. Lee, the new head surgeon. "We're ready to begin prep. The surgery is scheduled for 9 a.m. Min-jun's hand tightened around Tasha's. "Will you be here? When will I wake up?" "I promise," Tasha whispered. "Both of us will be right here." Min-jun looked at his father. "Appa, you'll really stay?" Jae-min leaned down and kissed his son's forehead, something Tasha suspected he hadn't done in years. "Yaksuke." I promise. They wheeled Min-jun toward the surgical wing. Tasha and Jae-min followed as far as they were allowed, then watched the doors close between them and the little boy who'd somehow become the center of both their worlds. The waiting room was sterile and impersonal. Tasha sat in a plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jae-min paced like a caged animal, unable to sit still, unable to do anything but move. "He's going to be okay," Tasha said quietly. "Dr. Lee is one of the best pediatric surgeons in Asia." "You researched him." "Of course I did. You think I was going to let just anyone operate on Min-jun?" Jae-min stopped pacing and looked at her. Really looked at her. "Why did you do it? Risk everything for a child who isn't yours?" Tasha was quiet for a long moment. "I had a nephew, back in Atlanta. His name was Marcus. Sweet kid, loved basketball, wanted to be a teacher." She wiped her eyes. "He got leukemia when he was 8. We tried everything. Fundraisers, charity care, sold everything we had. But it wasn't enough. The treatments were too expensive, and the waiting list for clinical trials was too long. He died 3 weeks before his 9th birthday." Tasha's voice was hollow. "I held his hand while he slipped away, and all I could think was, if we just had more money, more time, more access to the right doctors, he'd still be alive." "So you saved Min-jun because you couldn't save Marcus." "I saved Min-jun because no child should die just because the adults around them are too busy fighting for power to notice their suffering." She met his eyes. "Your son deserves better than that. Every child does." Jae-min sat down beside her, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his failures. "I don't know how to be a good father. Neither did my dad. He worked 3 jobs, was never home, and barely knew my name half the time." Tasha smiled sadly. "But when I asked him once why he did it, he said, because showing up is half the battle. The other half is staying." "Showing up and staying," Jae-min repeated. "Sounds simple." "It is, but simple doesn't mean easy." They sat in silence, 2 broken people brought together by a child's crisis, waiting for news that would either save them or destroy them. 3 hours later, Dr. Lee emerged from the surgical wing. His expression was carefully neutral as he approached. Jae-min stood, his whole body tense. "Well, the surgery was successful. We removed the obstruction and repaired the damage. Min-jun's vitals are stable." Dr. Lee allowed himself a small smile. "If recovery goes as planned, he should make a full return to normal life within 6 months." Tasha felt her legs give out. She sat down hard, covering her face with her hands as sobs racked her body. Jae-min remained standing, frozen, like he couldn't quite process the words he'd just heard. "He's going to be okay?" Jae-min's voice was barely audible. "He's going to be okay." Like the video if the ending surprised you. Comment on your reaction or your theory. Subscribe for free so you don't miss the next story, because this journey is far from over. 2 weeks later, Min-jun was transferred to a private recovery suite in the estate. The room had been transformed, medical equipment hidden behind decorative panels, the hospital bed replaced with a comfortable daybed, toys and books scattered everywhere. It looked less like a sick room and more like a child's paradise. Tasha had moved into the adjacent suite, her new quarters a far cry from the servant's closet she'd occupied for 3 months. Jae-min had insisted. She needed to be close to Min-jun during recovery. And honestly, Tasha didn't argue. The boy had become her world. She was reading to him, a Korean children's book about a tiger and a persimmon, when Jae-min entered carrying a small velvet box. Appa! Minjun's face lit up. He was still pale, still thin, but his eyes were bright again. Alive. Adeul! Jae-min sat on the edge of the daybed, ruffling his son's hair. How are you feeling? Good. Miss Tasha made me junk for lunch, the kind with chicken. Did she? Jae-min looked at Tasha with something that might have been gratitude, or maybe respect. Miss Tasha is very good at taking care of people. Minjun nodded enthusiastically. Can she stay forever? Actually, that's what I wanted to talk about. Jae-min opened the velvet box. Inside were two items, a gold chain and a wedding ring. Tasha's jewelry. The pieces she'd sold to save Minjun's life. I had my people track down the pawn dealer, Jae-min explained. He was encouraged to return these items, with compensation for his trouble. Tasha's hands trembled as she reached for the necklace. Her mother's necklace, the last piece of her old life. How did you? I have resources. He handed her the box. These belong to you. They should never have been sold in the first place. I sold them willingly. Because you had to. Because my people failed my son so completely that a stranger had to sacrifice everything to save him. Jae-min's voice was thick with emotion. That's not a debt I can repay, but I can start by returning what you lost. Tasha clutched the jewelry to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. There's more. Jae-min pulled out an envelope. This is a contract, managing household staff with full authority over hiring and operations. Salary is listed inside, along with compensation for the 3 months of hell you endured in my employment. Tasha opened the envelope. The numbers made her dizzy. This is too much. It's not enough. It will never be enough. Jae-min stood. You saved my son's life. You showed me that the most dangerous enemies aren't the ones outside my walls. They're the ones I invited inside and trusted blindly. You did that by just caring when no one else did. Minjun tugged on Tasha's sleeve. Does this mean you're staying? Tasha looked at the contract, at the jewelry, at the little boy whose life she'd saved and who'd somehow saved hers in return. Then she looked at Jae-min, a man who'd learned the hardest lesson of his life through the compassion of a stranger. Yeah, sweet boy, she whispered. I'm staying. 6 months later, the estate was unrecognizable. Tasha had systematically replaced every corrupt staff member, rebuilt the household from the ground up with people who valued competence and kindness over blind loyalty. The Korean workers who treated her like contaminated air were long gone. The new staff respected her, not because they feared her, but because she'd earned it. Minjun was thriving. Running through the gardens, laughing, playing, living, his doctors called his recovery miraculous. Tasha called it what it was. What happens when a child is actually loved instead of used as a pawn? And Jae-min? He'd changed too. Still running the syndicate, still making hard decisions. But now he came home for dinner, helped with homework, showed up for the small moments that used to seem insignificant. He'd learned that the strongest thing you can do isn't build higher walls or install more cameras or trust no one. It's recognizing when someone shows you loyalty without expecting anything in return, and honoring that loyalty by becoming worthy of it. Tasha stood on the terrace, watching Minjun chase butterflies. Her mother's necklace hung around her neck, warm against her skin. The wedding ring, she'd put it away in a safe. That part of her life was over. This was something new. Jae-min joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered her one. "Gamsahamnida," she said, accepting it. "Your Korean is getting better." "Had a good teacher." She nodded toward Minjun. "Kid's relentless." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the boy they'd both saved, in different ways, from different dangers, discover joy again. "I never thanked you properly," Jae-min said quietly, "for seeing what I was too blind to see. You thanked me, multiple times, with a ridiculous salary and a suite that's bigger than my entire apartment back home. That's compensation, not gratitude." He turned to face her. "Thank you, Tasha, for being the person my son needed when his own father couldn't be." Tasha met his eyes. "We saved each other. You just haven't seen it yet." "What do you mean?" "Before I came here, I was drowning. In grief, in guilt, in the memory of Marcus and every child I couldn't save. Working myself to death because if I stopped moving, I'd have to feel everything I'd lost." She looked back at Min-jun. "But saving him? It didn't erase Marcus. Nothing ever will. But it reminded me that love isn't about preventing loss. It's about showing up anyway, even when it costs everything." Jae-min was quiet for a long moment. "For what it's worth, you saved me too." "I know." They watched Min-jun together, two people who'd been broken by loss and betrayal, now bound by the shared purpose of protecting one small, precious life. And for the first time in years, both of them felt something they'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Like this video if you felt every moment of this story. Drop a comment telling me which scene hit you the hardest. Was it Tasha's sacrifice, Jae-min's realization, or Min-jun finally getting the love he deserved? And subscribe for free because next week's story is about a woman who discovered her fiancé's dark secret on their wedding day through a stranger's text message. You won't want to miss it.
Subscribe to Afro Syndicate for more exciting content. Hit that subscribe button and bell icon now.